I could have said something. I could have corrected him right then and there, saved everyone a lot of trouble. But I didn't. I just looked at my grandmother sitting across from me at the kitchen table, her coffee going cold beside her puzzle book, and I held the phone a little tighter. Then I did something my brother would later describe, in a courtroom, as the worst thing that ever happened to him. I put him on speaker. My grandmother looked up when she heard his voice. She tilted her head just slightly, the way she always did when she was paying close attention. Then she folded her hands on the table, leaned back in her chair, and listened. I need to back up. My grandmother raised me. That is the short version. The longer version involves my mother leaving when I was 4, my father working 2 jobs and then 3, and my grandmother, her name is Ruth. She is 78 years old, and she spent 31 years as a family law attorney before she retired, stepping in without anyone asking her to. She drove me to school. She sat with me when I had nightmares. She taught me how to write a check and how to read a lease and how to ask questions when someone is trying to rush you into signing something. She said that last one more than once. She said it like it mattered. My brother Marcus is 12 years older than me, different mother. He came into my grandmother's life the way he came into most things, loudly and with expectations. His mother and my father were together briefly when Marcus was young, and somewhere along the way my grandmother became his grandmother too, at least in the ways that were convenient for him. Holidays, birthdays when he remembered, the occasional Sunday dinner when he wanted something. He had never lived with her. He had never taken her to a single appointment. He had never once called on a Tuesday just to check in. But he had opinions about her house, her finances, her estate, as he started calling it a few years ago, as if she were already gone and the whole thing were simply a matter of paperwork. My grandmother noticed. She didn't say much about it, but she noticed. I moved back in with her 3 years ago, after my divorce. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I needed to get back on my feet, save some money, figure out what came next. But the months passed, and something shifted, and one evening over dinner she said, quietly, that she was glad I was there. Not because she needed help, because she liked the company. And I realized I was glad too, in a way I hadn't expected to be. We settled into a life together. I worked remotely, handling contracts for a mid-sized logistics company, and she gardened in the mornings and read in the afternoons and made enough food for 6 people every time she cooked. She had a doctor she trusted, a financial advisor she'd had for 20 years, and an attorney, a former colleague who handled her affairs. She was sharp. She was deliberate. She was, as her former colleagues liked to say at the holiday cards they still sent every December, one of the clearest thinkers they had ever known. None of that mattered to Marcus. To Marcus, she was simply an old woman with a house and a bank account, and time was moving in one direction. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning in March. I was at the kitchen table when my phone buzzed. Marcus. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken in 5 months, not since Thanksgiving when he spent 40 minutes asking my grandmother, leading questions about her plans for the property while she served him sweet potato pie and said nothing that committed her to anything. I had watched that conversation with something close to admiration. She answered every question he asked without actually answering any of them. I picked up, "Hey!" His voice was measured, careful in the way that meant he had rehearsed this. "I have some hard news. I just got a call from her doctor this morning. Grandma passed away last night. Heart failure." The kitchen was very quiet. My grandmother was sitting 4 feet away from me, working on a crossword puzzle, a cup of coffee steaming at her elbow. She was wearing a blue cardigan I had given her 2 Christmases ago. She was alive. She was entirely, completely, mundanely alive. I did not say a word. "The house, the accounts, everything, it's going to go through probate," he continued. "I've already spoken to an attorney. I'm the oldest family member. Given that she never updated her formal documentation, it should be straightforward. I just wanted you to know so you're not blindsided." A pause. "You were living with her. I know that changes things emotionally. But legally, you won't be entitled to anything. I'm sorry." He did not sound sorry. I looked at my grandmother. She had put down her pen. She was watching me with an expression I had seen before, the one she used to get in the middle of a negotiation, when the other side had just showed her exactly how far they were willing to go. I turned the phone over in my hand and pressed the speaker button. "Marcus," I said, "I'm going to put you on speaker for a second. I want to make sure I'm hearing this correctly." "Fine," he said. "Like I said, I know this is hard." My grandmother held up one finger, the universal signal for wait. She reached across the table and pulled a yellow legal pad toward her. She uncapped a pen. She wrote the time at the top of the page. 9:17 a.m. Then she wrote his name. Then she started writing. Marcus talked for another 4 minutes. He told me that he had already left a message with her bank to notify them of her passing. He said he was working with someone named Daniel, a cousin of his on his mother's side, someone I had met once at a cookout years ago, who apparently had some experience with estate administration. He said he would be reaching out to her financial advisor directly. He said there was no need for me to do anything, that the process would take care of itself, and that I should probably start thinking about my housing situation, since the house would likely need to be listed within the few months. My grandmother wrote all of it down. When he finished, I said, "Thank you for letting me know," and I ended the call. We sat in silence for a moment. Then my grandmother picked up her coffee, took a sip, and said, "He called the bank first." "Before he called you?" "That's interesting." She wasn't upset. She wasn't shaking. She was thinking the same way she always thought, with that particular quality of attention that had made her exceptional at her job for 3 decades. She was looking at the problem the way a contractor looks at a wall, not at the surface, but at what was behind it. "He mentioned Daniel," I said. She nodded slowly. "Daniel. I haven't spoken to that boy in 15 years. She tapped her pen against the legal pad. "Get me my phone, sweetheart. I need to make some calls." What happened in the next 6 hours was something I could not have managed alone. The first call she made was to her bank. She spoke to a manager she had known for years, a woman named Patricia who had processed her transactions for over a decade. She told Patricia, in a calm and unhurried voice, that she was alive, that she was calling from her home in the presence of her granddaughter, and that someone had contacted the bank that morning claiming she had died. She asked Patricia to document the call, to flag the account, and to notify her in writing of any access attempts made that morning. Patricia did not seem particularly surprised. She said they had received a call at 8:51 a.m. The caller had identified himself as a family member and stated that Ruth had passed away the previous evening. He had requested information about the account balance and inquired about the process for transferring assets to next of kin. Patricia said they had not released any information because company policy required a death certificate before any account actions could be taken. My grandmother thanked her and asked her to put everything in writing. The second call was to her attorney, a man named Howard who had been her colleague for 20 years before she retired and who still handled her personal legal work as a favor rather than a formality. She explained the situation in about 90 seconds. Howard asked 2 clarifying questions. Then he said, "I'll call you back in an hour." And he did. When he called back, he had already spoken to someone at the county level about the bank inquiry. He told her that what Marcus had done, calling a financial institution and falsely representing that an account holder had died, with the apparent intent to access or transfer assets, fell under elder financial abuse statutes in their state, as well as potentially constituting fraud and false representation. He said the documentation from the bank would be essential. He said she should not contact Marcus directly. He said he was going to draft a letter, and that if Marcus took any further steps, they would be filing a report with the state attorney general's office. My grandmother listened to all of this without interrupting. Then she said, "What about the house?" Howard said the deed was clean, properly held, and that no one could do anything with it without her signature or a court order. He said if Marcus tried to pursue guardianship claiming she was incapacitated, that would require a medical evaluation, and given that she was clearly of sound mind, any such attempt would go nowhere and would itself constitute grounds for a harassment claim. She wrote all of that down too. I sat across from her and watched her work, and I felt something that was difficult to name. It wasn't quite pride, though it was close to that. It was more like witnessing someone be exactly who they are, fully and without apology, at the moment when it mattered most. Around 2 in the afternoon, Marcus called again. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail saying he was just following up and that he wanted to coordinate on next steps. There was something slightly different in his voice this time, a tightness, an edge of uncertainty. Maybe the bank had called him back. Maybe something had shifted. My grandmother listened to the voicemail once, then asked me to save it. The following morning, Marcus and Daniel arrived at the house. I saw them pull up from the front window, Marcus in his silver SUV, Daniel in a rental car, both of them dressed like they had a meeting. Marcus had a folder under his arm. Daniel was carrying what looked like a printed document of some kind. I went to the door before they knocked. Marcus looked at me. He opened his mouth. "She's in the kitchen," I said. The color left his face so quickly it was almost like watching a fuse blow. I stepped aside and let them in. My grandmother was at the kitchen table. The yellow legal pad was in front of her, filled now with 2 days of notes. Her phone was beside it, already recording. She had told me that morning that in our state, Single-party consent meant she could record any conversation she was part of without notifying the other parties. She had explained this the way she explained most legal matters, not showing off, just making sure I understood. Marcus stopped in the kitchen doorway. For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then my grandmother said pleasantly, "Sit down, Marcus." He sat. Daniel stood near the door and did not seem to know what to do with the document in his hands. "I understand you've had a busy 2 days," she said. She folded her hands on the table. "You called my bank on Wednesday morning at 8:51 a.m. and informed them that I had passed away. You called my granddaughter at 9:13 a.m. and told her the same thing. You've been in contact with Daniel here about my estate." She glanced at the papers in Daniel's hand. "What is that?" Daniel looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the table. "That's a draft," Daniel said finally. "A petition for guardianship. It's just a draft." "I can see that," she said. "Sit down, Daniel." He sat. She looked at Marcus for a long time. He did not look back at her. "I have known you for 38 years, she said. "I was at your mother's hospital when you were born. I bought you your first bicycle. I sat in the front row at your college graduation." Her voice was even, completely even. "And I want you to understand something. Because I think somewhere in the last few years, you started to believe a story about me that isn't true. You started to believe that I was diminishing, that I was becoming something to be managed, that if you were patient enough and strategic enough, eventually the pieces would fall where you wanted them." Marcus stared at the table. "Look at me," she said. He looked at her. "I have known exactly what you were doing for 2 years, she said. "The questions at Thanksgiving. The calls to my financial advisor, yes," he told me. "He tells me everything. We've worked together since 1987. The conversation you had with my next-door neighbor about whether I'd mentioned selling the house." She paused. "I've been watching you build a case, Marcus. And I've been letting you, because I wanted to see how far you would go." The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. "Now I know," she said. She pushed the legal pad to the side and placed her hands flat on the table. "My attorney has already been in contact with the bank. They have documented the fraudulent call. Howard has reviewed the guardianship petition that Daniel is holding, which I assume you sent him in advance so he could be prepared, because you are, I'll give you this, fairly organized." She looked at Daniel briefly. "You drove up here from where? Georgia? That's a long way to come to hand. A retired family law attorney. A document she spent 31 years seeing across the table from the other side." Daniel set the papers down. "Here is what happens now," she said. "You are going to leave. You are not going to contact my bank, my financial advisor, my attorney, or my neighbors again. You are not going to call my granddaughter with information about my death, because I am not dead. And if you do it again, Howard will file a complaint with the State Attorney General's Office for elder financial fraud, which in this state carries a penalty of up to 5 years and a fine of up to $50,000 per violation." She looked at Marcus directly. "You have already committed one violation that is documented. Do you understand me?" Marcus nodded. He looked like a man who had walked into a room expecting it to be empty and found it full. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you for 38 years, and I expect I'll love you for whatever time I have left. But love is not the same thing as access, and family is not the same thing as entitlement." She stood up, which she did not need any help doing, smoothly and without ceremony. "I'll walk you out." They left. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the front door close, and then I sat down in the chair where Marcus had been sitting, and I put my face in my hands for a minute, not because I was sad, but because I had been holding myself very still for 2 days, and something needed to release. When my grandmother came back to the kitchen, she poured herself a fresh cup of coffee and sat down across from me. "You okay?" she asked. "Are you?" I said. She considered this. She picked up her pen and drew a line at the bottom of the second page of notes. Then she looked up at me. "I want to talk to you about something. I've been thinking about it for a while, but this clarified things." She told me she had already spoken to Howard about restructuring how her assets were held. Not because she was worried about her own clarity of mind, but because she was practical and she understood how quickly things could become complicated when there was no airtight structure in place. She wanted to put the house, the investment accounts, and her savings into an irrevocable trust. She explained what that meant, that once assets were in an irrevocable trust, they were no longer technically hers to be claimed by creditors or contested in probate, and the terms of the trust could not be changed unilaterally once established. She wanted me to be the trustee. I started to say I didn't know enough about that kind of thing. She smiled. I'll teach you. That's the whole point. Howard came to the house the following week. He brought the trust documents, walked through every line with both of us, answered every question I had, and answered 3 questions my grandmother asked that I hadn't thought to ask. We signed at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in March, with the sun coming through the window and a pot of coffee between us. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter from the State Attorney General's office. Marcus had received one too. It outlined the findings of their review of the bank complaint and stated that given the documented fraudulent communication and the subsequent attempted guardianship filing, Marcus was being issued a formal warning and placed on record. The letter stated that any further actions of this nature would result in criminal charges. I heard from him once after that, a text message, brief, that said only, "I didn't think it would go that far. I hope she knows I didn't mean for it to go that far." I showed it to my grandmother. She read it once, set the phone down, and went back to her crossword puzzle. "He meant every step of it," she said, not unkindly. "He just didn't mean to get caught." I thought about that for a long time afterward, about the difference between intent and accountability, about the way some people move through their lives assuming that the things they reach for will simply be there when the time comes, like fruit on a branch, like something owed to them by some arrangement they never had to name. My grandmother understood something that Marcus never did, that the people who show up, who drive to the appointments, who sit with the nightmares, who answer the calls on ordinary Tuesdays, those people don't need to fight for what they've built. Because what they've built is not made of property or accounts or paperwork. It is made of something that doesn't need a notary. The trust was finalized on a Friday. Howard called to confirm everything had been recorded properly. My grandmother made dinner roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from the garden, and we ate at the kitchen table and talked about her crossword puzzle and a documentary she wanted to watch and whether the tulips she'd planted along the front walk were going to come up this year or be stubbornly late again, like they were last spring. It was an ordinary evening. It was, in all the ways that count, the best kind. I did not hear from Daniel again. Marcus sent a card at Easter, just a card, no message, and my grandmother set it on the mantel with the others and didn't mention it. What I think about most, when I think about that Wednesday morning, is the image of her sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee and her puzzle book, listening to her own eulogy being delivered by someone who had miscalculated every single thing. The way she did not flinch. The way she picked up her pen. She didn't need to defend herself. She just needed to document. 31 years as a family law attorney. She had seen people at their worst, desperate people, frightened people, greedy people, and she understood something fundamental about what greed actually is. It is not confidence. It is not strength. It is fear wearing an expensive coat, hoping nobody looks too closely at the lining. She looked closely. She always had. The tulips came up in April, 14 of them, along the front walk, yellow and red, exactly where she'd planted them. She pointed them out to me one morning when I came down for coffee and she was already standing at the front window with her cup, watching the light move across the yard. "There they are," she said. There they were.